Hello, everybody. My name is Nicholas Pedrasky. I am joined by Jeff Hoogland,
Howdy.
and we're here to talk, once again, we just had a minor hiccup, about a mono blood control list. This is very similar to Identikit's list, which recently took down the Cosmic Crown Showdown, and it's a fun little brew. Why don't you go over the basics of what the deck can do, so everybody can have a glance?
So at its core, this deck is basically just playing both the most efficient threats that Blood has to offer in the format, in the form of Vampire King, Princess, and Prince. All of these cards not only are game-ending threats all on their own, by just being evasive threats, but they also buffer your life total against aggressive decks by offering life drain. On top of all of this, they also all generate card advantage. Vampire Prince draws resources off of your opponent's deck. Vampire Prince and Vampire Princess and Vampire King can draw cards out of your opponent's hand when they hit them, possibly. So, I have a lot going on there. Vampire Prince also synergizes nicely with Zenthoth's Malice, which is able to activate to put spiderling eggs into your opponent's deck, which get triggered and create spiders for us when we mill cards over with Vampire Prince.
Which is excellent, and also incredibly frustrating to play against. Over here in the top end, to combo out with a little bit with all the removal that we're running here, a lot of Rotcasts, a bunch of Hero Falls, which are exceptionally powerful. We got the Gallowgas, socketed up with the Minor Blood Orb of Frenzy and the Minor Blood Orb of Intimidation. I think some of the most fun people had watching when Hacky was shoutcasting the Radiant Rumble were these Gallowgas coming down with ridiculously large attack and defense numbers, stampeding over just like with the speed, can't be blocked, 16 damage to the face, good game. So, really quickly going back to the Malice, that combos in part not just with the Vampire Prince, but also with the champion Bloodspinner Zorath, who creates a Dread Banner. This is a 5-charge ability that creates a 3-cost constant, puts it into play, makes a Dreadling at the start of every turn, and this is a fun little, kind of horrible on its own ability, that once you pair it with the Malice, lets you draw a card every turn, gain 2 health every turn, at the cost of a little bit of resources.
That banner also synergizes with the Gallows Gas at the top end of the curve because those Dreadlings are dying every turn, basically guaranteed. So if you have a Gallows Gas stuck in your hand, it's going to just be getting larger and larger and larger until eventually it's just lethal in one shot.
Which is excellent. In addition to picking apart our opponent's hand with Vampire King, Vampire Princess, and Giant Corpse Fly, well, to the vampires, we also have Giant Corpse Flies, which are an interesting addition. I don't think Identikit was running these. I'm not 100% certain. I didn't see his list beforehand. But
Giant Corpse Fly is just kind of one of those cards that is just a good pound card quality card, because when you play this card on turn 3, you're almost certainly going to have your opponent discard something. So just by entering play, it's getting a 1-for-0 out of your opponent essentially. So you don't even really care what happens to this 2/1 because it already cost your opponent a card. So anything this is able to trade for or do afterwards is just all gravy on top of the 1-for-0 it already got.
which is pretty good in the aggro matchups. I don't know about great in the aggro matchups, but you're getting a card out of their hand, and this will likely trade with an X1 or get a burn action out of their hand, which is nice. We also have a couple of Arachnophobia, more Spiderling Eggs, more discard,
Yep,
and
good quality, pure 2-for-1.
we have a one of dormant one. So when this goes off, it's amazing. So why don't you talk about that for just a second?
So Dormant One's another card that allows us to leverage Bloodspinner Zorath's banner ability. So every time a troop you control dies, this gets a counter on it, and then for each counter that's on Dormant One, all of your troops in play have +1 power, which makes your vampires that are already potent threats even more lethal, and they're able to buffer your life total and become even more impossible to race. But then eventually, once this gets its third counter, Dormant One turns into the Unbound One, which is a 6/6 with flight and invincible that gives all your other troops +3 power, and then when it deals damage, you basically revert this, which turns it back into its initial form. So basically, it charges up, becomes a big scary flying monster to pair with our other big scary flying monsters, and then attacks our opponent. And then, if by the grace of God they're still alive after they get attacked by all of our +3 power troops in the 6/6, it starts all over again.
Which is pretty fantastic. So why don't we look at our reserves here for a second? Would you Would you like care to go over your reserve choices here? Because this is, again, this is a list you put up on Hex Primal. So if anybody wants to take a look at that, they can go over to Hex Primal. It's in your article competitive tier list, competitive constructed tier list. Forgive me for not knowing the exact name of the article, but I'm sure you have it
Yep.
handy.
No worries. So the sideboard of these mid-range style decks generally allows you to kind of tune for whatever matchup you are post reserves. We have additional copies of Rockcast to pair for the more aggressive decks, like the Mono Ruby aggressive deck that's running around has Matriarchs and Baby Yetis and Arsonists, Anarchists, which all need to be removed. We've got a couple copies of Vampire Kiss that allow us to buffer our life total nicely against things like Yodel Burn and also the Mono Ruby aggressive deck and the various McBombus decks that are floating around. Vampire Kiss pairs nicely with your Vampire Princess because Princess says if she's in your opening hand, she can make kisses cost 0 resources until end of turn, and that doesn't just include kisses she's made, and can include kisses that you've just put into your deck and drawn.
Excellent. So the Steel Intel is a fun little addition. I've seen this do a lot of hilarious work, but I'm never sure, honestly, what its intent is. So why have you included it?
So I think Steel Intel is a very powerful card because the prophecy decks are those mechanics are all fully functional again, and they're very potent. This card allows you to pick your opponent's like Lanupus that's going to copy itself back up out of their crypt and replay it, and you can generate all that card advantage that their powerful card is cast. I've also seen some very amusing games where your opponent casts Psychic Ascension and you pick it back up, and you're both Paragons of Thought going back and forth.
Which is one of my favorite uses of it, but I'm never sure if that, like I said, I don't think that's ever the intent, but it makes for some of the most interesting games that I've seen.
The important thing to note about this deck is because we're playing Xenthoth's Malice, we're often loading our control opponent's decks up with Spiderling Eggs in the long game, which means we don't want to play a card like Relentless Corruption in our reserves because when we draw Spiderling Eggs off our opponent's deck, they get the spiders. So we want kind of this effect that's good against Prophecy cards that Steel Intel has to offer, but when we're unable to play Relentless Corruption because of other cards that we're already playing.
Nice. Do you want to talk about, real quick, the shard base here? It's just 20 blood shards, which is pretty typical for a mono shard deck. And you've included 4 Star Sphere over, I would say, the myriad of choices. Now Star Sphere is a more powerful non-standard resource, but why Star Sphere instead of, say, Kismet's Reverie to change a Xenthoth's Malice or Primal Essence, I guess?
I think the two different choices that you want to have for these blood decks are probably either the Star Sphere or the Crackling Vortex to get to your Blood Spinner Zorath banner a little bit faster. I like Star Sphere just because it can provide some powerful selection in a deck like this that generally isn't drawing a lot of cards in the early game. While we have a lot of late game power with drawing 2 cards a turn on the back of Xenthoth's Malice and Spiderlings from our banner, in the early game we don't have any sort of selection like Arcane Focus or Change Course that Sapphire cards generally tend to provide. So this can add a little bit of consistency to our early game. Since our late game's so powerful, we just want to make sure we live to get there, and Starseer is really good at helping us do that.
Excellent. Well, hopefully that gives people a general overview of what this kind of list is doing. I'm sure we're going to see plenty of it during the Rumble. So thank you once again for coming out, and I'll see you in the next Tech Tech.
Yep.